Welcome back to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. We continue our discussion on the Delaware economy and the effects of the possible move and or restructuring of Astrazeneca and DuPont. DuPont's not going anywhere, but they are restructuring. To continue that conversation, Jim Butkiewicz, who is the professor and department chair at the University of Delaware Economics Department, and also Joe Fuhr, who is a professor of economics at Widener University. So let me just start with asking, should we be reading more into the stories? It seems like every time we see a story about AstraZeneca and DuPont, they're linked together. And the assumption would be they're linked together because it's a bigger story about Delaware. Is it?
Well, I think they're two separate stories. AstraZeneca is a pharmaceutical company right now that could still be a takeover target. And if they're taken over, they could very well be moved somewhere else. Certainly if Pfizer had succeeded in their takeover attempt, it was pretty clear that AstraZeneca wasn't going to stay in Delaware. DuPont's a local company with its roots in Delaware, and they're moving out of Wilmington and restructuring, but they're going to stay in Delaware.
And do you see a bigger story here with the focus on these two companies and the fact it sounds like there will be some layoffs, and it sounds like there could be big layoffs if AstraZeneca leaves. Do you see a bigger story for Delaware in that?
Well, if we look at AstraZeneca, there's a lot of mergers happening in the pharmaceutical industry, so I would expect that it's for real that eventually they will be taken over by someone. But in terms of bigger...
Let me stop you on that one for 1 second.
Okay.
If they are taken over by someone, does that mean they leave Delaware?
I would say they have a higher percentage chance of leaving Delaware when they're, if they were taken over by someone.
I interrupted you.
Okay. And in terms of the bigger story, it's always a big story when companies leave and come in because there's a tremendous amount of economic impact that these companies can have. Not only the companies themselves, but the infrastructure. There's a thing called a multiplier effect in economics that talks about the fact that if you look at AstraZeneca, which is on 202, you have that whole strip mall there, and if they leave, people, you'll have less people who will be buying gas in that area, less people going to the restaurants, getting their dry cleaning done and things of that nature.
When you Google Delaware, and you Google Wilmington, which is like #1 in research nowadays, you see Wilmington highest crime rate in the country. And fair or unfair, does that scare away companies?
Sure it does. Sure it does. Although I think if companies do their research, they find that Delaware is not just Wilmington. And if you go outside of Wilmington into the county, there's not that fear, there's not that concern. So they don't look just at Wilmington. They would look at Newcastle County or Kent County or Sussex County, depending on where they want to locate, and look at the total environment and total package. Companies look at things like the tax rate, the fact we don't have a sales tax, vicinity to major highways like I-95, quality of schools, quality of life, and things like that, because the people are going to live there. And so while the crime rate in Wilmington or other places is certainly high and a problem, that's not necessarily going to affect the decision if they're not looking to locate right downtown.
You're both so calm about this, and yet when you read the headlines and you read the stories with AstraZeneca and DuPont, I think the underlying story in the whole thing is that this is a real blow. This could be a real blow to the Delaware economy, and that it foretells bad things to come. Is there too much doom and gloom in the stories in that narrative?
I think so. The question becomes, you're hearing about the ones that are leaving, but how often do you hear about the good news, the ones that are coming in?
Is there good news?
As far as, I haven't really looked at all the companies coming in, but there are companies constantly coming in and out of areas.
And we only have a few seconds left, but as we sit here today, AstraZeneca, if you had to bet on it, are they leaving?
I would say so.
And only because you believe they're a takeover target?
Right, I believe they're.
Yeah. Same thing?
They're a takeover target, and if they're taken over, you don't need two managements to run a pharmaceutical company, so there's a lot of redundancy in what's here in Delaware.
Well, great, and thanks for putting some perspective on all of this, because I think people read the headlines and they're worried about the economy immediately, but if let's say DuPont restructures and they lay off, and AstraZeneca leaves, major hit or just a hit?
We've absorbed it before. When I came here in the 1970s, DuPont employed almost 30,000 people in the state of Delaware. That's down in you know, I don't know the exact number, 5,000 or 8,000 now. It's much, much lower, and Delaware has survived.
Yeah, I agree. It would just be a minor hit.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you both being here. Jim Butkiewicz, professor and department chair at the University of Delaware Economics Department, and Joe Fuhr, who is a professor of economics at Widener University. I really appreciate the perspective. When we come back, we're going to talk to somebody who is an expert on moving companies to talk about why companies may want to move out of Delaware.